Hello everybody, Petro here. We've gone through some videos so far. We covered looking at a soil test report, what we can glean from that information. We went through comparing fields or parts of fields on soil test reports. So now let's dive into the calculation portion. I'm going to run through the phosphorus cycle real quick, not nearly as in depth as I did on sulfur. Most of us know what's going on here. I just want to highlight a couple portions and then we'll move on to the actual calculations themselves. So with the phosphorus cycle, there's going to be several sources, but when we look at what's going on in our soils, there is an awful lot of phosphorus, but a lot of it is built up in this non-labile portion. So that portion is things like your primary minerals, the stuff that makes up the soil, and that's not going to be available for the crop. Even though there's a lot of phosphorus in the soil, it may not be available. We do have our sulfur that's in solution, so this is what is directly available to the plant to take up. That number is going to vary depending on your soil test report. Some sources for this: there's organic matter, the fertilizer you apply, and there's also our portion of phosphorus that's labile. So this is going to be something that is adhered to a soil colloid. It's going to be something that's pretty easily accessible where the phosphorus can readily break free. So when we're looking at our soil test report, if you're doing a Bray 1, you're going to be looking at mostly what's in the solution. If you're looking at a Bray 2 test, it's going to have a little bit stronger extraction for some of this labile phosphorus. So if your Bray 2 number is higher than your Bray 1 number, it will be because it's including some of this. So when we think about this cycle, phosphorus tends to hang in the soil. It can be taken up by the plant. It doesn't tend to move as much unless we get to really high soil test levels. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. I believe it's in that 100 pound, 100 part per million range. I'm not sure which one, but look it up. But when we see that happening, there's so much phosphorus in here, we get to a point where we start to see leaching. So when we're looking at how much phosphorus fertilizers to apply, we're really trying to toe that line where we have an adequate amount in solution for the plant. We have some reserve built up in this labile portion, but we don't want to be in this leaching. So when we think about phosphorus getting into the waterways, it could be a bad application where maybe we go out and we apply our phosphorus fertilizer, our manure to the soil surface. It's right in front of a big heavy rainfall event. That gets washed directly into the ditch. It gets washed into the creek, whatever. It'll make its way to the lake. Or if we are in this situation, we're going to be constantly leaching out phosphorus. Every time that we're getting gravitational water to the tile, it's going to be leaking with phosphorus. So we want to avoid this as much as possible. So when we get our soil test report back, the number that we get is going to put us into basically one of three categories. It's going to be build. So this is where your level is so low that you want to add additional fertilizer, and we're trying to build that number up to that 15 part per million, 30 pound per acre critical level. Once you get above that, you want to maintain. So you want to stay there. So we've got a decent amount of labile phosphorus, a decent amount in solution that we can supply the crop with what it needs. And then if we get too high, we want to avoid this leaching, so you're going to draw down. If you look at each of the Soil Labs websites, they will have basically a summary of where each region of the state, each state, where the soil tests that they get rank. And what we see for Ohio, Western Indiana, the majority of our soils are in either this build or maintain range. So we don't have a whole lot of soils down here. Most farms will have it. It's probably going to be that area that was closest to the barn where Grandpa just went out and did the same 10 acres with manure every single year and just built those levels up too high. If you're in a livestock area, it's generally going to be the fields closest to the barn where they've just been pouring and pouring and pouring manure on. Or if you've just been blindly applying phosphorus to a field, we're going to quickly get into this range. So I'm going to focus on these two. If you're in this drawdown range, you're probably not going to need to apply phosphorus, or if you are, it's going to be a very small amount. So there is an equation to work through that, but I'm not going to cover it here today. So now for everybody's favorite subject, math. So these are fairly simple equations. So if you are in a build, this is going to be your equation. If you're in a maintenance range, this is going to be your equation. And when you look at these quickly, you'll see that our maintenance is included in this build portion, and then this section here is based on your soil test report. So this is why it's critical to have your soils tested, so you know where you fall for these, and also it's important in the calculation. So I'm going to run through this first portion real quick, and then we'll go to the build, or into the maintenance portion. But for the build, it's your critical level. So that is 15 part per million minus your soil test level. And with parentheses, we always work our way out. So our critical level is 15. Our soil test level, I'm just going to say off of one of the soil tests we looked at in our previous video, that's 11. So it's below this number. And then that's going to get multiplied by 5. So this is 4 times 5. So we need 20 pounds of phosphorus on top of what our crop removal is going to be in order to build. This is going to be your yield, obviously, times your crop removal. I'll post a link for these numbers. OSU's done a lot of work recently to try and go back to the tri-state and figure out if these crop removal numbers are the same. For phosphorus, it's pretty close. Potassium, they are seeing some divergence where we're actually taking less potassium per bushel of grain. But if you do the math out, we're seeing increasing yield. So even though we're taking less per bushel, we're taking more bushels. So it might work out to be even. It might work out to actually be more fertilizer. So I'm going to toss in some yields here. If our phosphorus level's low, we won't have the best field potentially. So our yield goal for corn is going to be 150 bushel per acre. For soy, let's say we're at 55 bushel per acre. And for wheat, we're at 60 bushel per acre. So you take your yield, you multiply it by that crop removal. Again, I'll post that link, but that's going to be 0.35 pounds per bushel for corn. It's going to be 0.79 pounds per bushel for soy, and 0.49 for wheat. So when we do the math on these, it's going to be 52 pounds, it's going to be 44 pounds, and it's going to be 30 pounds. So for our entire equation, we have to add this 20 pounds to what our crop's going to remove. So for corn, I'm going to do these in a different color so it pops out. So for corn, we're going to apply a total of 72 pounds of phosphorus fertilizer. We're going to apply a total of 64 pounds for soy. And for wheat, we're going to apply a total of 50 pounds. Now, I did all these together at the same time because you're going to have to go through how you want to apply fertilizer and when you want to apply fertilizer. So for phosphorus, as long as we're below that high rate where things start leaching, it tends to stay where you apply it. So if you want to do a multiple year application, that's fine, but you have to think through your crops. And if we're going to do a fall application before we plant corn, and we're going to have a corn, soybeans, wheat rotation, you would need to add each of these in and make one bulk application. So that is possible with things like phosphorus and potassium, definitely not for things like nitrogen or sulfur. But when we look at that total number, it's not just go out, okay, we're going to plant corn and we're going to apply all of that phosphorus, plant our beans, plant our wheat, and that's it. You have to go back and make sure that these numbers are still accurate. So an example would be, let's say we planted 150 bushel per acre corn. We had a great year, we had 200 bushel per acre corn. Well, that's going to use more than this 52 pounds of phosphorus. So you're going to have to backtrack and figure out how much more phosphorus you might need to apply, because the next couple of years you're going to short your soybean and your wheat crop. And this is where we have guys talking about, well, my corn yields are always fantastic. My wheat yields, soybean yields, they're just okay. They never seem to get up like the corn does. Sometimes it's little things like this where you're just simply shorting it of critical nutrients, especially something like potassium on soybeans. So we want to go back and make sure this is still truthful over the years, but you can do that multiple year application. So let's go through the maintenance down here. Similar calculation to what we did here, but let's say we're going to go on a better field, 220, 65 on our soy, and 100 bushel per acre on our wheat. We go back, we use our crop removal, 0.35, 0.79, 0.49. And that is going to equal 77 pounds, 51 pounds, and 49 pounds. So when we're in this maintenance application, we're going to be applying just about the same amount for a 220 bushel corn crop versus 150 bushel per acre corn crop. So you can see once you do the investment in getting these levels built up, it's going to start to make this fertilizer expenditure a little bit less every year once you get it built up. And it's going to give you more insulation against like something would happen. We have this big corn crop and we didn't plan for it. You've got a little bit more in that labile portion that you can pull out and actually put into that corn crop. You'll still have to go in and make sure that these numbers are truthful if you're going to do a multi-year application, and then always want to ride that fine line before we get to that drawdown period, because we're basically wasting phosphorus there because it's leaching straight out of the soil. So that is phosphorus fertilizer calculations in a nutshell. Lots of math. The great thing is there are some online tools. There's tables you can go through and just say, I'm going to have 150 bushel per acre crop. This is my soil test level. What's going to be the amount of phosphorus I need? So you don't necessarily have to go through these calculations. I just wanted to go through and show you where all the numbers were coming from and how we arrive at that point. Hopefully that was helpful. I've got one coming on potassium and then one on nitrogen. And the nitrogen will be a little more in-depth into how it's applied, when it's applied, and all the pieces that go into nitrogen, because it's very complex. So thank you very much. Keep an eye out for future videos.